All right, so because you guys did a great job tearing apart the topic last week on the discussion post about external funding in schools, I felt it necessary to comment on it and just get a little bit more insight to everything. So I'm going to start historically, I think somewhat historically. If you go back to the late 80s, early 90s, there was a company called Channel One run by a man named Chris Whittle. You can Google that, Channel One. I don't know if you saw any effects when you guys were in school, but what the Channel One did was they made an offer to school districts they couldn't refuse. They would come in and install new televisions in every classroom, free of charge. The hitch was that every morning, at the beginning of school, there would be like a 7 or 8 minute period of time where the students had to watch the television, and it would be like kind of like if you ever saw like Saturday morning kids news type things. It'd be teenagers or younger people doing news like headlines about sports, what was in the news. But interlined with all that was Burger King and advertisements, Snickers advertisements, etc. So they're basically a captive audience. There were extreme cases where teachers were reprimanded, and in some cases punished for turning down the volume on the televisions during that time period. They had the rules of the contract were you had to let the students watch the program uninterrupted. That kind of met with a lot of controversy, but they held the bargain stayed true. That the company Channel One, many schools got free televisions in every room because of it, so they upheld their end of the bargain. They've kind of whittled away a little bit, no pun intended, since the guy's name was Chris Whittle. If you fast forward a little bit, being from Pennsylvania, it was a big deal. If you know anything about the history of Penn State, their uniforms have been historically sparse. There's nothing on them. White helmets, white pants, almost like practice uniform looking. What was a really big deal when Penn State made the deal to allow Nike to put the swoosh stripe on the jerseys, and it raised a lot of people complained, about the tradition of Penn State, and we don't need this kind of thing. But of course, Penn State received millions and millions of dollars because of this. So that was one thing I wanted to hit on. You guys brought up some interesting points about Got Milk campaigns. We do advertise in schools. We allow those things. So I don't know, the milk industry. I'm not sure if the milk industry, the dairy industry, ever paid schools any money. Those were kind of school health, school food programs tend to fall under the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So I think a lot of those things were public service type. So I don't think any dairy council was paying schools any money to hang Got Milk posters. Although you could argue that they certainly benefited from those posters being hung. The same with box tops for education. A lot of schools were able to raise money for classrooms through box tops for education. Uh, but certainly it's great advertising to do something like that. Um, was your school when you went to where you went to elementary high school? Did you have PCs or did you have apples? In Pennsylvania, it was a big deal that I haven't been in the schools here yet. Dell used to supply huge quantities of computers at really low prices if you had all Dell computers. Again, that's not a direct cash funding issue, but you are getting something for something, a quid pro quo. Um, the U.S. Army, things like the military service, they advertise in our schools. Nestled into the many, many pages of the Patriot Act was a requirement that all schools had to let military recruiters come into the schools. It used to be there were stipulations. You would see things set up like at a cafeteria during lunch. Army, Navy, etc. All those recruiters couldn't go up and actually solicit a student. A recruiter could not walk over to a student while he was having lunch, say a high school senior, and start throwing literature down in front of them. But the kids could go to them at a table on the side. The Patriot Act changed that. That allowed principals could not say no. It was a requirement of the federal law. So that's an interesting thing to discuss. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm not saying we shouldn't have a civilian volunteer army by any means, but it is something that happens in schools. Um, I can remember that in my high school where I taught, a local bank would come in and do a little spiel on what it means to have savings and investment, to high school seniors, and they would bring in nice presentations, give out free pens and literature and stuff. Well, here's a pen with our bank's name on it. It was good information because it was valuable to students to see what savings would do, what investment strategies, these things that as you move to the world of being an adult. But at the same time, they were all giving out free pens that said Mellon Bank on it or something like that. And then, of course, we have to where do we draw the line then? I mean, this discussion was about actual cash funding. The soda companies were big on this. Pepsi and Coke probably did more in-school direct cash layouts for advertising than any other corporations. You don't see many high schools having Nike endorsements, Reebok endorsements. I'm sure some exist, especially maybe if they're larger. Things like football helmets, usually made by companies like Riddell or anything like that. I don't think the schools aren't really getting paid to use those. So there's a weird crossover there. But how far do we go with this? If we start out, some of you were against it. Some of you said there should be community input on it. Others said no problem. You need to make money. Why not? It's America. And if we draw those lines, where we draw those lines is an interesting thing to consider. If we, kids wearing Hollister shirts to school, you're advertising a brand. If there's a McDonald's across the street with a big sign flashing, there's all these things. We already don't allow schools to have, at least my school didn't, there was a ban on wearing like beer shirts. Students could not wear shirts advertising any beer, could not wear shirts advertising tobacco products. And interestingly enough, I remember a case in my school where a student was in trouble for wearing a tobacco jacket, but his parents didn't have a whole lot of money, and they actually saved up what used to be called Marlboro points that you got if you smoked a certain amount of cigarettes. You saved the UPC symbols. You could send them to Marlboro and get free merchandise. Well, the kid had a winter jacket that said Marlboro on it. That was his winter jacket. So should he be allowed to wear that to school in the dead of winter? So anyhow, the issue here is that this is very convoluted. It's kind of fallen out of fat a little bit. You don't see so much discussion about it anymore, but I'd say right around 9/11, somewhere around that time period, things kind of changed a bit. But before these things fell out of fashion, schools started realizing they were kind of selling their souls just to get extra cash, and in a lot of cases, that it was a lot of money. So, all right, so you guys did a great post, and I just wanted to comment, add a couple things to it. We'll move forward. I don't expect any more. If it comes up, certainly I'll allow the discussions to be organic and let you discuss this again if you'd like. But I think enough's been said on it. So, thank you.